Kim Woo-jin stepped off the transport shuttle and looked around the massive space station. Everything was huge. The walls stretched high above his head, and the corridors were wide enough for several Earth buses to drive side by side. This was Galactic Academy Station Omega-7, and it was nothing like the small schools back on Earth where he used to teach. The air smelled different here. It was clean, but had a strange metallic taste. Woo-jin carried his single bag and followed the floating signs that would take him to his new classroom. He had been chosen to teach at this school because humans were new to the galaxy. The Galactic Council wanted someone to teach the history of primitive species to their students. Woo-jin did not like being called primitive, but he needed this job. Earth was still very poor compared to other planets, and teaching here would help his family back home. He had been a teacher for 10 years and had also served in the Korean military. He knew how to handle difficult students. As he walked through the station, he saw many different types of beings. Some looked like walking, crystals that made tiny ringing sounds when they moved. Others were just floating balls of light that left glowing trails behind them. There were creatures with too many arms, beings that looked like plants, and some that seemed to be made of metal, but the ones that made everyone else step aside were the Keth-Mori. Woo-jin had read about them during his trip to the station. The Keth-Mori were the most feared species in the galaxy. They stood 9 feet tall and had long, sharp claws that could cut through almost anything. Their skin was dark and tough like armor. They had rows of sharp teeth and could spit acid. Most scary of all, they could walk through walls by making their bodies like ghosts. For thousands of years, the Keth-Mori had been the rulers of space. No one fought them. No one argued with them. When a Keth-Mori spoke, everyone listened. They were the apex predators of the galaxy, and they acted like it. Woo-jin found his classroom and set up his desk. The room was designed for many different types of students. Some desks were very tall, others were wide, and some seemed to float in the air. He put his few belongings in the desk drawer and waited. The students began to arrive. First came a group of crystal beings who made beautiful singing sounds when they talked to each other. Then came some of the light creatures, floating near the ceiling. A few plant-like students took seats near the windows where they could get more light. Finally, the door opened wide and a young Keth-Mori walked in. The room became very quiet. All the other students moved away from the newcomer. The crystal beings stopped singing. The light creatures dimmed. Everyone was afraid. The young Keth-Mori was about 7 feet tall, smaller than an adult, but still much bigger than Woo-jin. His name was Velthar, according to the class list. He had the same dark skin and sharp claws as his species, but his eyes were bright yellow and seemed to glow. When he smiled, Woo-jin could see his sharp teeth. Velthar looked around the room, like he owned it. He walked to the biggest desk in the center and sat down, even though it was not his assigned seat. The crystal student who was supposed to sit there quickly moved to a different desk without saying anything. "Good morning, class," Woo-jin said in the universal language that all species could understand. "My name is Teacher Kim, and I will be teaching you about the history of species development." Most of the students replied politely. Velthar just stared at him with those glowing eyes. Woo-jin began his lesson about how different species had evolved on their home planets. He talked about how environment shaped the way beings developed. The students seemed interested except for Velthar, who was looking at his claws and clearly not paying attention. The crystal beings developed their hard bodies to survive on planets with extreme temperatures, Woo-jin explained. The light creatures learned to float to escape ground predators on their world. One of the crystal students, whose name was Krinala, raised what looked like an arm. "Teacher Kim, what about humans? How did your species develop?" Before Woojin could answer, Velthar laughed. It was a deep, scary sound. "Humans are just prey animals," he said loudly. "They are soft and weak. They have no claws, no armor, no special powers. They are nothing." The other students looked nervous. No one ever disagreed with a Kethmori, but this was very rude behavior in a classroom. Wu Jin remained calm. He had dealt with bullies before. "Thank you for your opinion, Velthar. However, we should let others speak without interrupting." Velthar's eyes got brighter. He was surprised that the human had said his name and corrected him. Most beings were too scared to speak directly to a Kethmori. The lesson continued, but Velthar kept interrupting. When a plant student tried to answer a question, Velthar made loud snorting sounds. When one of the light creatures dimmed with nervousness, Velthar laughed and said they were weak. Finally, Krinala, the crystal student, was presenting a project about her home world. She had built a beautiful model of her crystal city using her own shed crystal pieces. It had taken her many hours to make, and it sparkled like a jewel under the classroom lights. As she was explaining how her people built their homes, Velthar stood up and walked over to her desk. "This is boring," he said. "Crystal people are just pretty rocks." Before anyone could stop him, Velthar brought his large hand down on the crystal model. It shattered into hundreds of pieces, making a sound like breaking glass. Krinala made a high, sad singing sound that meant she was crying. The room was completely silent. Everyone stared at the broken pieces of crystal scattered across the floor. Some of the other students were shaking with fear. Wu Jin looked at the broken model, then at Krinala's trembling form, then at Velthar, who was standing there looking proud of what he had done. "Velthar," Wu Jin said in a quiet but firm voice, "go sit in the corner. You are in timeout." The silence in the room became even deeper. Every student stopped moving. Some stopped breathing. The light creatures became so dim they almost disappeared. Velthar stared at Wu Jin with his mouth open, showing all his sharp teeth. For a moment he looked confused, like he had heard words in a language he did not understand. Then he began to laugh. It started as a low rumble and grew louder and louder until it filled the whole room. "You want me to do what?" he said, still laughing. "You are telling me, a Kethmori, to sit in a corner. You are just a soft little human. You cannot tell me what to do." Wu Jin did not laugh. He did not smile. He looked directly into Velthar's glowing eyes and repeated himself. "I said go sit in the corner. Now." Velthar stopped laughing. His eyes got brighter, and his smile disappeared. He realized that the human teacher was not joking. No one had ever given a Kethmori an order before. In the entire history of the galaxy, no being had ever told one of the apex predators what to do. The room waited to see what would happen next. Velthar's confusion lasted only a moment. Then his face changed. His yellow eyes became brighter and more dangerous. His lips pulled back to show all of his sharp teeth. The claws on his hands grew longer and sharper. He stood up to his full height, towering over the human teacher. "You dare command me?" Velthar growled. His voice was deep and threatening. "I am Kethmori. We are the hunters of the galaxy. We are the strongest. You are nothing but prey. All." The other students moved as far away as they could. The crystal students huddled together, making scared, ringing sounds. The light creatures fled to the corners of the ceiling. Even the plant students, who were usually calm, were shaking their leaves in fear. Red warning lights began flashing in the classroom. The station's computer had detected a Keth Mori in attack mode. Somewhere in the security center, alarms were going off. Guards would be rushing to the scene, but everyone knew they would be too late. No one could stop a Keth Mori once they decided to kill. Velthar took a step toward Wu Jin. His claws made scraping sounds on the floor. "I will show you what happens to creatures who forget their place," he said. "I will tear you apart slowly so all these weaklings can watch. They will remember never to challenge the Keth Mori again." Wu Jin did not run. He did not scream. He did not even step backward. Instead, he did something that shocked everyone in the room. He took a step toward Velthar. "Sit down," Wu Jin said. His voice was not loud, but it was firm and steady. "You broke another student's project. You were rude and mean. Now you will face the consequences." Velthar was so surprised that he stopped moving. In his entire life, no being had ever moved toward him when he was threatening them. Everything always ran away from the Keth Mori. That was how the galaxy worked. "You must be insane," Velthar said. "Do you not understand what I am? I can phase through matter. My claws can cut through steel. My acid can melt most metals. I am death itself." "You are a student in my classroom," Wu Jin replied, "and students follow the rules." Wu Jin had learned many things during his time as a sergeant in the Korean military. He had trained young soldiers who thought they were tough. He had faced down bullies who tried to intimidate others. He knew that most aggressors were actually cowards inside. They used fear because they had never been challenged. But this was different. Velthar was not just a bully. He was a killing machine from a species that had conquered half the galaxy. Still, Wu Jin had made his decision. He would not let this creature terrorize his students. Velthar suddenly lunged forward with incredible speed. His claws aimed for Wu Jin's throat. Most beings would have been dead before they could blink, but Wu Jin was not most beings. He had been trained in combat. More importantly, he had been trained to think under pressure. As Velthar attacked, Wu Jin did something unexpected. He stepped to the side and slightly forward, using Velthar's own momentum against him. The young Keth Mori was so surprised by this move that he stumbled past Wu Jin and crashed into a desk. He turned around quickly, his eyes now burning with rage. "Impossible," Velthar snarled. "You are just a weak human." "I am a human who served in the military," Wu Jin said calmly. "I have faced dangerous things before. You are just another bully who needs to learn manners." Park Minji, a student from the light-being species called the Luminals, was floating near the ceiling. She had her quantum recording device out and was capturing everything. Her people were scientists and explorers, and she knew she was seeing something that had never happened before in galactic history. Velthar attacked again, this time trying to grab Wu Jin with his powerful hands. But the human teacher was ready. He ducked under the grab and moved behind Velthar. When the Keth Mori spun around, Wu Jin was not where he expected. "Stand still and die like prey should," Velthar roared. He was getting frustrated. Keth Mori were used to quick kills. Their victims usually froze in terror or ran in panic. They were not used to opponents who fought back intelligently. Wu Jin continued to move around the classroom, always staying just out of Velthar's reach. He was not stronger than the alien, but he was smarter. He used the desks and chairs as obstacles. He made Velthar chase him, wearing down the larger being's energy. "You cannot run forever, human," Velthar said, breathing harder now. "I will catch you, and when I do, your death will be very slow." "I am not running," Wu Jin replied. "I am teaching you a lesson about consequences." The human teacher led Velthar toward the corner of the classroom. It was the same corner where he had told the young Kethmori to sit for time out. As they got closer, Wu Jin suddenly stopped and turned around. "This is your last chance," he said, looking directly into Velthar's glowing eyes. "Sit in the corner and think about what you did wrong. Or keep acting like a wild animal and prove that your species really is just a bunch of savage beasts." Velthar hesitated. Something in the human's voice was different now. It reminded him of the way his father spoke when giving important commands. There was no fear in it, no doubt. It was the voice of someone who expected to be obeyed. "You call us savage beasts?" Velthar said, but his voice was not as confident as before. "I call you what your actions show you to be," Wu Jin answered. "You destroyed another student's work for no reason. You threaten beings smaller than you. You use your strength to hurt instead of protect. What would you call that behavior?" For the first time in his life, Velthar found himself thinking about his actions. The Kethmori were taught that might made right, the strong ruled, and the weak served. But this human was not weak even though he had no claws or special powers. He had something else. Something Velthar did not understand. The security doors suddenly burst open and a team of station guards rushed in. They had weapons designed to stop even Kethmori attacks. But they stopped in confusion when they saw the scene. Velthar was not standing over a dead human. Instead, the two were facing each other in what looked almost like a conversation. "Stand down," the guard captain called out. "Both of you, move away from each other." "This is my classroom," Wu Jin said, without taking his eyes off Velthar. "I am handling a discipline problem. Please wait outside until we are finished." The guards looked at each other in amazement. A human was giving them orders while facing down a Kethmori. And somehow, he was still alive. Velthar looked at the guards, then back at Wu Jin. The human had not moved. He was still waiting for an answer. Still expecting the Kethmori to make a choice. Slowly, very slowly, Velthar began to walk toward the corner. He did not understand why he was doing it. His entire body told him to fight, to kill, to dominate. But something in the human's steady gaze made him keep walking. He reached the corner and, for the first time in Kethmori history, sat down because someone else had told him to. The classroom was silent, except for the sound of Velthar's heavy breathing. Every being in the room stared in shock at what they had just witnessed. A human had put an apex predator in timeout, and the apex predator had obeyed. News traveled fast through the galaxy. Park Minji's recording of the classroom incident was shared across thousands of worlds within hours. Every species that had lived in fear of the Kethmori watched in amazement as a small human teacher made one of the apex predators sit in a corner like a scolded child. Admiral Kang De-ho was in his office on the human embassy ship when the emergency message arrived. As the highest-ranking human in galactic space, he was responsible for all human activities outside Earth's solar system. The message was marked urgent and came from the Galactic Council itself. "Admiral Kang," the holographic message began, "you are ordered to appear before an emergency session of the Galactic Council in 6 standard hours. The matter concerns a serious incident involving a human citizen and a member of the Kethmori Empire." Kang knew this could only be bad news. Humans were still new to galactic politics, and they could not afford to make enemies of the most powerful species in space. He immediately ordered his ship to travel to the Council Station at maximum speed. On Galactic Academy Station Omega-7, the situation was tense. Velthar remained in the corner of the classroom, but he was no longer the same arrogant young predator who had walked in that morning. Something had changed in his mind during those hours of sitting and thinking. Wu Jin continued teaching his class as if nothing unusual had happened. He helped Krinala gather the pieces of her broken crystal model and promised to help her build a new one. He answered questions from the other students and gave them assignments for the next day. But everyone could feel the difference in the room. The other students kept looking at Velthar in the corner, then at their human teacher. They had seen something impossible happen, and they did not know what it meant. During lunch break, most students left the classroom quickly. They wanted to tell others what they had seen, but Velthar remained in his corner and Wu Jin stayed at his desk. "Why did you not kill me?" Velthar asked suddenly. His voice was quiet and confused. Wu Jin looked up from the papers he was grading. "Why would I kill you?" "Because I attacked you. Because I threatened you. That is what strong beings do to those who challenge them." "Is it?" Wu Jin asked. "Does killing someone weaker than you make you strong?" Velthar thought about this question. His entire life, he had been taught that the Keth-Mori were strong because they could destroy other species. It was the natural order. The powerful ruled, and the weak served or died. "Yes," he said, but he did not sound certain. "The strong survive, the weak perish. That is how the galaxy works." "Is that why your people have so few friends?" Wu Jin asked. The question surprised Velthar. He had never thought about friendship. The Keth-Mori did not have friends. They had subjects, servants, and enemies. Other species obeyed them out of fear, not loyalty. "We do not need friends," Velthar said. "We have power. And yet here you are, sitting in a corner because a weak human told you to." Wu Jin pointed out. "If power is everything, why did you obey me?" Velthar did not have an answer. For hours he had been trying to understand why he had done what the human asked. Every instinct told him to fight, to kill, to dominate. But something in the teacher's calm voice had made him stop. Dr. Lee Sang-mi arrived at the classroom that afternoon. She was the station's expert on alien psychology and had been studying the recordings of the morning's events. As a human, she was curious about how Wu Jin had accomplished something that should have been impossible. "Teacher Kim," she said, as she entered the classroom. "I need to speak with you about this morning's incident." Wu Jin nodded and followed her out into the hallway, leaving Velthar alone in the corner. The young Keth-Mori could have left at any time, but he chose to stay. "What you did today," Dr. Lee began, "it should not have been possible. Keth-Mori do not submit to other species. Their psychology is built around dominance and aggression. They literally cannot understand the concept of yielding to a weaker being." "Maybe that was the problem," Wu Jin said. "He assumed I was weaker." "But you are weaker," Dr. Lee insisted. "Physically, I mean. He could have killed you in seconds." "Physical strength is not the only kind of power," Wu Jin replied. "I learned that in the military. Sometimes the strongest soldier is not the one with the biggest muscles. Sometimes it is the one who refuses to give up." Dr. Lee looked through the classroom window at Velthar, who was still sitting quietly in the corner. "He is experiencing something completely new. For the first time in his life, he has encountered a form of authority that does not depend on physical dominance. I think it has confused his entire understanding of how the universe works. Meanwhile, across the galaxy, the Keth Mori Empire was in chaos. The recording of their young warrior being dominated by a human had spread to every Keth Mori world. Some called for immediate war against humanity. Others demanded that Velthar be executed for bringing shame to their species. War Prime Jektal, Velthar's father and one of the most powerful Keth Mori leaders, received the news while commanding a fleet near the Outer Rim. When he saw the recording, his rage was terrible to behold. He immediately ordered his entire battle group to travel to Galactic Academy Station Omega-7. "Prepare for war," he commanded his officers. "This insult to our species will be answered with blood." The Galactic Council emergency session was unlike anything in recorded history. Representatives from hundreds of species gathered to discuss what the human incident meant for galactic stability. Many were excited by the possibility that the Keth Mori could be challenged. Others were terrified that humanity had just started a war that would destroy them all. Admiral Kang stood before the assembled representatives and tried to explain his species' actions. Teacher Kim was simply maintaining discipline in his classroom. He said, "Humans believe in treating all beings with respect, but also in having rules that everyone must follow." "Your teacher humiliated a Keth Mori warrior," accused the representative from the Vorthak Empire. "Do you understand what this means? The Keth Mori have never forgiven an insult. They will demand blood." "Then perhaps it is time for the galaxy to stop being afraid of bullies," Kang replied. His words caused an uproar. Some representatives cheered, while others demanded that humanity hand over the teacher to avoid war. The session dissolved into chaos, as species that had been enemies for centuries suddenly found themselves on the same side, united in their amazement that someone had finally stood up to the apex predators. Back on the station, Wu Jin was finishing his evening meal when the alarms began to sound. Emergency lights flashed throughout the corridors, and the station's voice announced that a Keth Mori war fleet had been detected approaching at high speed. Students and teachers began evacuating to the station's safe zones, but Wu Jin returned to his classroom. He found Velthar exactly where he had left him, still sitting in the corner. "Your people are coming," Wu Jin said. "Yes," Velthar replied. "My father will want to kill you for what you did to me." "And what did I do to you?" Velthar was quiet for a long moment. "You made me think," he said finally. "For the first time in my life, you made me wonder if there might be a better way than violence." "Is that such a terrible thing?" "For a Keth Mori, it is the most terrible thing of all," Velthar said. "We are taught that doubt is weakness, but now I doubt everything I was taught." The station shook slightly as the Keth Mori war fleet took position around it. Soon Velthar's father would arrive, and Wu Jin would have to face the consequences of his actions. But as he looked at the young Keth Mori sitting thoughtfully in the corner, Wu Jin realized that maybe those consequences were worth it. For the first time in galactic history, one of the apex predators was learning that there might be something more important than being the strongest creature in the room. The Keth Mori flagship was a massive black vessel that looked like a giant predator floating in space. Its dark hull was covered with weapon ports, and energy fields crackled around its edges. When it docked with Galactic Academy Station Omega-7, the entire structure shook from the impact. War Prime Jektal was even larger than his son, standing nearly 10 feet tall with scars covering his dark armor-like skin. His claws were longer and sharper than any other Keth Mori, and his yellow eyes burned with an ancient fury. Behind him walked a group of elite Keth Mori warriors, each one a veteran of countless battles. The station's corridors cleared as the Kethmori delegation moved through them. Even the bravest security guards stepped aside. Everyone knew that when a war prime was angry, death followed quickly. Wu Jin waited in the station's main conference room. He had volunteered to face Jektal alone rather than risk the safety of his students or colleagues. Admiral Kang had tried to convince him to let the diplomats handle the situation, but Wu Jin knew this was his responsibility. When the conference room doors opened, Jektal filled the entire doorway. His massive form blocked out the light from the corridor behind him. He looked around the room until his glowing eyes found the small human sitting calmly at the far end of the table. "You are the one," Jektal said. His voice was like thunder rolling through a cave. "You are the soft creature who dared to command my son." "I am teacher Kim Wu Jin," the human replied, standing up slowly. "And yes, I disciplined your son for destructive behavior in my classroom." Jektal's warriors moved to surround the table, but the War Prime held up one massive hand to stop them. He wanted to handle this himself. "Do you know what you have done?" Jektal demanded. "For 10,000 years, no being has given orders to the Kethmori. We are the apex predators of this galaxy. We take what we want and destroy what stands in our way." "I know what your species is capable of," Wu Jin said. "But in my classroom, everyone follows the same rules. Your son broke another student's project and refused to apologize. That behavior has consequences." Jektal laughed, but it was not a pleasant sound. It was the laugh of a predator who had found amusing prey. "Consequences? The only consequence that matters is strength. I could tear you apart with my bare hands. I could melt your bones with my acid. What consequences can you possibly threaten me with?" "The same consequences your son discovered," Wu Jin replied calmly. "The knowledge that being physically powerful does not make you right." The War Prime stopped laughing. He had expected the human to beg for mercy or try to bargain for his life. Instead, this small being was lecturing him about right and wrong. "Explain to me this sorcery you used on Velthar," Jektal demanded. "What weapon did you use to control his mind? What technology made him obey you?" "I used no weapon and no technology," Wu Jin said. "I simply refused to be intimidated." "Impossible. Kethmori do not submit to inferior species." "Maybe that is the problem," Wu Jin suggested. "Maybe thinking that other species are inferior is what makes you weak." Jektal's eyes blazed brighter. "Weak? You dare call the Kethmori weak?" "How many true allies do you have?" Wu Jin asked. "How many species follow you because they want to, rather than because they are afraid? How many beings would help you if you were in trouble?" The question caught Jektal off guard. The Kethmori Empire was vast and powerful, but it was built on fear. Other species obeyed them because they had no choice. None of them actually liked or respected the Kethmori. "We do not need allies," Jektal said. "We have strength. Your son had strength too, but he still ended up sitting in a corner thinking about his behavior," Wu Jin pointed out. "Maybe strength alone is not enough." At that moment, the conference room doors opened again, and Velthar entered. The young Kethmori had followed his father's ship to the station. He looked different now, calmer and more thoughtful than before. "Father," Velthar said, "I need to speak with you." Jektal turned to his son with surprise and anger. "You should not be here." "You have brought shame to our family and our species." "Have I?" Velthar asked. "Or have I learned something important?" "You submitted to a prey animal," Jektal roared. You obeyed a creature that we could crush without effort. That is the deepest shame a Kethamori can experience. I learned that there are different kinds of strength, Velthar said. Teacher Kim did not defeat me with claws or acid or physical power. He defeated me with something else, something I had never encountered before. And what was that? Certainty, Velthar answered. He knew he was right, and he refused to back down even when facing death. That kind of strength cannot be cut with claws or melted with acid. Jektal looked back and forth between his son and the human teacher. Nothing in his long life had prepared him for this conversation. The Kethmori understood only one kind of power, the power to destroy. The idea that there might be other forms of strength was completely alien to them. The other students in the class, Velthar continued, they were afraid of me at first. But after Teacher Kim put me in timeout, something changed. They started to treat me differently. They showed you more fear? Jektal asked. No, Velthar said quietly. They showed me respect. Real respect, not the fake obedience that comes from terror. For the first time in my life, other beings looked at me and saw something other than a monster. Wu Jin watched the conversation between father and son with interest. He could see that Jektal was struggling with concepts that his species had never considered. The idea that respect might be better than fear was revolutionary to the Kethmori way of thinking. Tell me about these other forms of strength, Jektal said to Wu Jin. Explain to me how a weak creature like you can command a being like my son. I will show you, Wu Jin said. But first, I need to know if you are here to learn, or if you are here to kill me. I came here to avenge the insult to my species, Jektal admitted. But now I am curious about this power you seem to possess. Wu Jin nodded. Then let me tell you about human child rearing. On my world, we believe that young beings need guidance to become good adults. When they misbehave, we do not kill them or cast them out. Instead, we help them understand why their behavior was wrong and how they can do better. And if they refuse to learn, then we set boundaries. We show them that actions have consequences. But the goal is always to help them grow, not to destroy them. Jektal was quiet for a long moment. And you believe this method works better than force? Look at your son, Wu Jin said. In one day, he has learned more about working with others than in his entire previous life. He is still strong and dangerous, but now he also understands when not to use that strength. As if to prove Wu Jin's point, alarms suddenly began sounding throughout the station. A group of pirates had chosen this moment to attack, thinking that the station would be defenseless while the Kethmori and humans were in their meeting. Velthar immediately moved toward the conference room exit. I must protect the other students, he said. Wait, Jektal commanded. This is not our fight. Let the weak defend themselves. But Velthar was already gone, rushing through the corridors toward the student dormitories where his classmates were sheltering. For the first time in his life, he was using his strength to protect beings smaller than himself, rather than to dominate them. Jektal looked at Wu Jin with something that might have been respect. Your teaching methods are very strange, human, but perhaps they are more effective than I thought. The pirate attack was brief, but violent. 3 ships had broken through the station's outer defenses, and armed raiders were moving through the corridors. They had expected easy prey, students and teachers with no real protection. They had not expected to face a young Kethmori who was protecting others instead of hunting them. Velthar moved through the station like a force of nature, but with a purpose his species had never shown before. When he found pirates threatening the crystal students, he used his claws to disable their weapons rather than kill them. When raiders cornered a group of plant beings, he stood between them and danger, using his natural armor to block their attacks. The other students watched in amazement. They had feared Velthar that morning, but now they saw him as their protector. Krinala, the crystal student whose project he had broken, actually cheered when he saved her dormitory from the pirates. In the conference room, Jektal listened to the battle reports with growing confusion. "My son is fighting to protect prey. Animals," he said to Wu Jin. "This is not how Kethmori behave." "Maybe it is how they should behave," Wu Jin suggested. "Your people are the strongest in the galaxy. Instead of using that strength to rule through fear, you could use it to protect those who cannot protect themselves. And what would we gain from this? The same thing your son gained today. Real respect instead of fearful obedience." The pirate attack was over within an hour. Velthar had single-handedly captured most of the raiders and driven off their ships. But instead of killing them as any other Kethmori would have done, he had simply defeated them and turned them over to station security. When he returned to the conference room, his armor was scratched and his claws were dulled from battle. But his eyes were bright with something new. Pride that came from helping others rather than destroying them. "Father," he said to Jektal, "I understand now what Teacher Kim was trying to show me. Real strength is not about making others fear you. It is about making others trust you." Jektal looked at his son for a long moment. The young Kethmori stood straighter than before, but there was something different in his posture. He looked confident, without looking arrogant. He looked strong without looking cruel. "The other students," Jektal said slowly, "they were grateful to you for protecting them?" "Yes," Velthar replied. "And it felt better than any victory I have ever had in combat." That night, an emergency meeting was held between the human representatives, the Galactic Council, and the Kethmori delegation. What happened in that meeting would change the course of galactic history. Jektal stood before the assembled representatives and spoke words that no one had ever expected to hear from a Kethmori war prime. "My species has been wrong," he said, simply. "We have confused strength with cruelty, and power with the right to dominate others. The human teacher has shown us a different way." The council chamber erupted in shocked whispers. Some representatives thought they were hearing things. Others wondered if this was some kind of Kethmori trick. "I propose an experiment," Jektal continued. "The humans have something they call an exchange program. I want Kethmori young to learn their methods of education. In return, we will provide protection for any species that agrees to participate." Admiral Kang stepped forward. "You are offering alliance instead of domination?" "I am offering partnership," Jektal corrected. "The galaxy has many threats: pirates, rogue AI systems, cosmic disasters. Instead of spending our energy fighting each other, we could work together to face these challenges." Dr. Lee Sang-mi was chosen to help design the new education program. She worked with Wu Jin to create a curriculum that would teach young Kethmori about cooperation, empathy, and the responsible use of power. Teacher Han Yun Seo arrived from Earth to assist with the program. She was an expert in conflict resolution and had worked with difficult students for many years. Together with Wu Jin, she began training the first group of Kethmori teachers in human educational methods. The results were extraordinary. Young Kethmori, who had been taught only to hunt and kill, began learning about science, art, and philosophy. They discovered that their natural abilities could be used for construction and exploration instead of destruction. Velthar became the first Kethmori ambassador to the Galactic Council. His job was to help other apex predator species understand the new way of thinking. He traveled to worlds where beings had lived in fear for generations and showed them that the strongest creatures could also be the most protective. Captain Yoon, so young, who had been prepared to fight a war against the Kethmori Empire, instead found herself working with them to hunt down pirates and smugglers. The combination of human strategy and Kethmori strength proved to be incredibly effective. 6 months after the detention incident, Galactic Academy Station Omega-7 had become the most prestigious school in known space. Every major species wanted to send their young to learn the human method of combining strength with wisdom. Wu Jin, now promoted to Director of Interspecies Education, stood in his old classroom and watched as Velthar taught a group of young warriors about what he called constructive dominance, the idea that true strength came from protecting others rather than threatening them. "Teacher Kim," Velthar called out during a break in his lesson, "I have a question from one of my students. She wants to know what happens when someone is too strong to be put in timeout." Wu Jin smiled. "Tell her that the strongest beings do not need to be put in timeout, because they put themselves in timeout when they realize they have done something wrong." The young warriors in Velthar's class thought about this answer carefully. They were learning that the most dangerous creatures in the galaxy were also capable of the most important lesson of all, knowing when not to use their power. That evening, Wu Jin received a message from his family back on Earth. His younger brother wanted to know if the stories were true. Had he really made a galactic apex predator sit in a corner like a misbehaving child? Wu Jin thought about how to answer. The truth was more complex than the stories made it seem. He had not defeated Velthar through superior strength or advanced technology. He had simply refused to accept that some beings were too powerful to be held accountable for their actions. In the end, he wrote back, "I taught a student that being strong does not mean you can be cruel. It turns out that was a lesson the whole galaxy needed to learn." Years later, when historians wrote about the great change that transformed galactic civilization, they would mark its beginning as the day a human teacher put an apex predator in detention. But those who lived through it knew the real truth. It was not the detention that changed everything. It was the moment when the strongest beings in the galaxy realized that their greatest strength lay not in their ability to destroy, but in their choice to protect and build instead. The corner of that classroom became a symbol known throughout space. It represented the simple but revolutionary idea that everyone, no matter how powerful, must face consequences for their actions. And sometimes, the most important consequence is taking the time to think about how you can do better. In the end, Wu Jin's greatest lesson was not taught through words or punishments. It was taught through the example of a teacher who saw a bully and refused to be afraid, who looked at a monster and chose to see a student instead. That lesson spread across the stars and changed the way an entire galaxy thought about strength, power, and what it truly means to be the strongest creature in the room.